1,000 horses for one night with your wife. The rancher's offer stunned the Apache tribe. The sun was dropping low over the desert when the rancher's truck rolled toward the Apache meeting grounds. Dust lifted behind the tires and hung in the air like a warning. People noticed the vehicle long before it stopped. Children paused their games. Elders turned their heads. Even the dogs went quiet. Everyone knew who he was. He owned miles of land beyond the hills, land fenced tight and guarded well. He was known for his money, his horses, and his belief that nothing stood above his will. He stepped out of the truck slowly, adjusting his hat as if he were arriving at a celebration instead of a serious council. His boots were polished, his belt heavy with silver. 2 men followed him, silent and watchful. The rancher smiled, the kind of smile that did not reach the eyes, and nodded at the people gathered there. He believed he was the most important man on that ground, even though he was standing on land older than his family name. The Apache elders had agreed to meet him for one reason only: water. The summer had been harsh, and the river that once ran steady now thinned by the week. The rancher had recently redirected a stream that fed the reservation. He claimed it was legal. The tribe claimed it was survival. This meeting was meant to talk, to reason, and to find a way forward without conflict. They sat in a wide circle under a large shade structure made of wood and cloth. The elders took their places first, calm and steady. Faces marked by time, eyes sharp with memory. Younger leaders stood behind them, ready to listen. The rancher took his seat across from the oldest elder, a man whose voice carried weight not because it was loud, but because it was true. At first, the talk stayed formal. Words about landlines, old agreements, and shared history were spoken carefully. The elder reminded the rancher of promises made decades ago, promises written and spoken. The rancher replied with smooth language about business needs, growth, and progress. His tone suggested patience, but his posture showed control. As the discussion went on, the rancher grew restless. He leaned back, crossed his legs, and tapped his fingers against his knee. He looked around, not at the elders, but at the people standing behind them, as if measuring what they were worth. When the elder spoke again about restoring the water flow, the rancher sighed loudly. "That land is mine," he said. "I paid for it. I built on it. I decide how it's used." The elder did not raise his voice. He simply said, "Water does not belong to one man." The rancher's smile returned, sharper this time. He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, though everyone could hear. He spoke of his horses then. He talked about their strength, their bloodlines, their value. He described them with pride, naming numbers that made some of the younger men glance at each other. Horses meant wealth, status, and power. Everyone knew that. Then, without warning, he said something that cut through the air like a blade. The words were not loud, but they were heavy. He spoke as if making a trade, as if speaking about land or cattle. He suggested an exchange that crossed every line of respect. He believed that with enough wealth, even honor could be negotiated. For a moment, no one moved. The desert wind seemed to stop. Birds that had been circling overhead disappeared into the sky. The elder's face remained calm, but his hands tightened slightly on his staff. Across the circle, his wife sat quietly, her back straight, her eyes forward. She did not flinch, but everyone felt the weight of the moment press down on her like heat. The rancher waited, confident. He truly believed he had made an offer too big to refuse. Silence stretched. It was not an empty silence. It was full of shock, anger, and disbelief. The younger men stiffened, some taking a step forward before being held back by a look from the elders. This was not just an insult to one family. It was an insult to the tribe, to their way of life, to every story passed down through generations. The elder finally spoke. His voice was steady, but something deeper moved beneath it. "You have mistaken where you are," he said, "and who you are speaking to." The rancher chuckled, shaking his head as if amused by stubbornness. He waved a hand dismissively, repeating his belief that everything had a price. He spoke of opportunity, of how such an exchange could change lives. He spoke as though he were generous, even kind. That was when the elder's wife turned her head and looked directly at him. Her gaze held no fear. It held something far stronger, dignity. She did not speak because she did not need to. Her presence alone exposed the rancher's mistake. She was not a thing to be traded. She was a partner, a keeper of history, a mother, a voice within the tribe. The rancher saw her, but he did not understand her. The elder rose to his feet slowly. Every movement carried meaning. When he stood, others stood with him, forming a silent wall. The rancher's smile faded. For the first time, he sensed that his power did not reach as far as he believed. "You came here to talk about water," the elder said. "Instead, you showed us your heart." The rancher tried to speak, but the words felt smaller now. He stood as well, adjusting his jacket, clearly uncomfortable. He muttered something about misunderstandings, about jokes taken too seriously, but no one laughed. The meeting ended without ceremony. No agreement was made. The rancher walked back to his truck under dozens of watching eyes. The dust rose again as he drove away, but this time it felt heavier, like the land itself had rejected him. That night, the tribe gathered. Fires were lit, and voices rose in quiet discussion. Elders spoke to the young, reminding them that dignity must be defended with wisdom, not rage. The elder and his wife sat together, hands linked, surrounded by respect and support. Word of the rancher's offer did not stay contained. It traveled beyond the reservation, carried by those who had heard it, shaped by disbelief. Some refused to believe it at first. Others knew exactly the kind of man who would say such a thing. As the stars filled the sky, the elder looked out across the land that had held his people for generations. He knew this moment was only the beginning. The rancher had drawn a line, even if he did not realize it yet. And once a line like that is drawn, the earth remembers. Far away in a large house built of stone and glass, the rancher poured himself a drink. He told himself the meeting had gone poorly because the tribe was unreasonable. He told himself he would find another way. But deep down, something unsettled him. For the first time, his wealth had failed to silence a room. And somewhere between the desert wind and the quiet firelight, the story of that offer began to change. It was no longer about power. It was about dignity. And dignity, once challenged, does not fade quietly. Morning came quietly, but the land felt different. The sun rose the same way it always did, yet something heavy rested in the air. People woke with the memory of the rancher's words still echoing in their minds. It was not just a bad meeting that ended the night before. It was something deeper, something that touched old wounds that had never fully healed. By the time the first fires were lit for breakfast, everyone knew what had happened. News traveled fast, not because people rushed to spread it, but because silence could not hold it. Neighbors spoke in low voices. Elders were greeted with respectful nods that carried questions no one dared to ask aloud. The story moved from home to home, shaped by disbelief and anger, yet carried with care. Children noticed the change before anyone explained it to them. They saw their parents speak less and listen more. They felt the tension in the way hands tightened and eyes watched the road more closely. Even without understanding the words that had been spoken, they understood that something wrong had been done. The elder's wife began her day as she always did. She rose early, wrapped herself in a shawl, and stepped outside to greet the light. The earth beneath her feet felt steady, familiar. She breathed deeply, letting the desert air fill her chest. She did not feel broken or ashamed. She felt resolved. Women from nearby homes came to sit with her. They brought tea, bread, and quiet company. No one spoke of the rancher directly at first. They spoke of daily things, of weather, of children, of memories. This was how they showed support, by being present. By reminding one another that no insult could erase who they were. Later that day, the elders gathered again. This time there was no outsider sitting among them. Only familiar faces, serious and thoughtful. They spoke openly now. Some expressed anger, others worry. A few feared that standing firm would bring trouble. The rancher had money, influence, and friends in high places. He could make life harder if he chose to. The oldest elder listened to every voice. He did not interrupt. When the room grew quiet, he spoke. "What was said was meant to weaken us," he said. "Not just one family, all of us." Heads nodded slowly. They understood. The offer was not about desire or impulse. It was about control. It was about testing whether the tribe could be pushed, bought, or divided. Outside the council space, younger men stood together, restless. Some wanted to confront the rancher directly. Others spoke of blocking roads or fences. Their hearts burned with the need to defend honor quickly and loudly. An older man stepped among them and placed a firm hand on one young shoulder. "Strength is not always loud," he said, "and anger is easy to provoke." The words did not erase the fire, but they slowed it. Meanwhile, beyond the reservation, the rancher spoke too. He told his version of the story to people who would listen. He laughed it off, saying the tribe had misunderstood him, that they were too sensitive. He claimed he was only negotiating in his own way. Some nodded along, unwilling to challenge him. Others frowned, sensing something was wrong but unsure how to say it. A local reporter heard whispers and began asking questions. A lawyer who had worked with tribal land issues before made a call. A former business partner of the rancher remembered old disputes that never quite felt right. The story began to grow legs, moving beyond the dusty roads where it began. Back on the reservation, the elder's wife met with younger women. She spoke calmly, her voice clear and steady. She told them that dignity was not something others could give or take. It lived inside, carried forward by choice. Her words did not sound rehearsed. They sounded lived. That evening the tribe held a gathering, not a protest. Not a celebration, a gathering. Fires burned low, casting long shadows. People sat close together, listening as elders shared stories of past challenges. Stories of times when offers were made, threats whispered, lines crossed. Each story ended the same way. With survival through unity. One elder spoke of his grandfather, who once faced a similar insult from a trader long gone. Another spoke of a woman who stood firm when pressure was placed on her family. These were not stories meant to inflame. They were meant to remind. As the night deepened, the youngest among them listened with wide eyes. They were learning that history was not just something in books. It lived in moments like this. The elder and his wife sat side by side, hands resting together. They did not need to speak. Their presence alone reassured many. They had not been broken. They had not stepped back. They had stepped forward simply by remaining who they were. Elsewhere, the rancher felt irritation grow into something else. He noticed phone calls were not returned as quickly. A meeting was postponed without explanation. A friendly message went unanswered. He told himself it was coincidence, but doubt crept in. He replayed the meeting in his mind, trying to find where it had gone wrong. Each time, he reached the same conclusion. They should have accepted. That belief comforted him, even as it isolated him. By the end of the week, the story had reached places neither side expected. Community leaders, advocates, and even a few officials began paying attention. Questions were being asked not loudly but persistently, and questions once asked rarely disappear. On the reservation, life continued. Work was done. Children went to school. Meals were shared. But beneath it all ran a current of awareness. The line drawn at that meeting had not faded. It had sharpened. The elder stood one evening at the edge of the land, watching the sunset paint the sky. His wife joined him, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. The world felt large and uncertain, but their footing felt sure. "What comes next?" she asked softly. He looked ahead, not at the horizon, but at the path they had always walked. "We stand," he said, "and we let the truth do its work." Behind them, the tribe gathered strength in quiet ways. And far beyond the hills, the rancher began to realize that some offers do not end a conversation. They begin one. The days that followed felt slower, as if time itself was watching carefully. People moved through their routines, but their thoughts stayed alert. Every sound of a vehicle on the road drew attention. Every unfamiliar face brought quiet questions. What had happened was no longer just a moment. It had become a shadow that followed everyone. The elder spent much of his time listening. People came to him with concerns, fears, and suggestions. Some worried about safety. Others worried about the future of their land and water. He listened without judgment, knowing that each voice mattered. Leadership, he believed, was not about giving quick answers, but about holding space until the right path became clear. At the same time, stories about the rancher began to surface. They did not arrive all at once. They came slowly, like pieces of a puzzle being set on a table. A man from a nearby town spoke quietly to a friend on the reservation. He mentioned an old land dispute that had ended suddenly years ago, leaving one family forced to move. A former employee recalled how the rancher handled disagreements, always smiling, always calm, but never backing down until he got his way. A small business owner remembered being pushed into selling at a loss after refusing one too many friendly suggestions. None of these stories were dramatic on their own, but together they formed a pattern. The local reporter returned, this time with more focus. She did not rush. She asked careful questions. She listened more than she spoke. She requested public records, old agreements, and meeting notes. She spoke to people who had once praised the rancher and to those who had quietly avoided him. What she found surprised even her. The rancher's success had not come from hard work alone. It had been shaped by pressure, by knowing which doors to knock on and which to quietly close for others. He rarely broke rules openly. He bent them, leaned on them, and used them to his advantage. When people resisted, they often found themselves isolated. As these details began to circulate, the tribe did not celebrate. There was no satisfaction in being proven right. Instead, there was clarity. The insult they had faced was not an accident. It was part of a long pattern of behavior. The elders gathered again, joined by advisors and legal advocates who had offered support. They discussed options, not with excitement but with seriousness. Each choice carried weight. Speaking publicly could bring attention and pressure. Staying silent could invite further disrespect. The balance between wisdom and action was delicate. One younger leader spoke up. "If we stay quiet, others may think we accepted it," he said. An older woman responded gently. "And if we speak without care, they may twist our words." The room grew thoughtful. Meanwhile, the rancher noticed the shift more clearly now. Invitations stopped arriving. Casual conversations turned formal. People who once laughed at his jokes now ended calls quickly. He grew irritated, then defensive. He told himself that this was all temporary, that people would forget. But forgetting did not come. He met with his advisors, pacing his office as they spoke in cautious tones. One suggested issuing a statement to calm things down. Another warned that drawing attention could make matters worse. The rancher dismissed them both. He believed he could control the outcome, just as he always had. Yet control felt slippery now. On the reservation, the elder's wife became a quiet anchor. People sought her presence, not because she spoke loudly, but because she listened deeply. She reminded others that they were not reacting to a single moment, but responding to a history. Her calm steadiness helped ease fears and guide conversations back toward unity. She met one afternoon with a group of teenagers who had heard fragments of the story online. They asked hard questions. Why would someone think they could say such a thing? Why did this keep happening? She answered honestly, without bitterness. "Some people grow used to being obeyed," she said. "They forget how to see others as equals." Her words stayed with them. As the week stretched on, more outside eyes turned toward the situation. Advocates reached out. Letters arrived offering support. Some were careful, some emotional, but all carried the same message. You are not alone. The reporter's article began to take shape. It did not focus on anger. It focused on facts, on patterns, on voices that had long gone unheard. She wrote with care, knowing that truth needed space to breathe. Before publishing, she offered the rancher a chance to respond. He laughed when he read the questions. He called them exaggerated, misleading, unfair. He prepared a response filled with polished words and empty reassurances. He denied any wrongdoing, insisting that his intentions had been misunderstood. But intention was no longer the center of the story. Impact was. When the article was released, it spread quietly at first. Then more widely. People read it slowly, recognizing familiar themes. The rancher's name, once spoken with admiration in some circles, now carried unease. On the reservation there was no celebration. There was reflection. The elder stood before the council once more. We did not ask for this attention, he said, but we will not hide from it either. They agreed to speak when needed, to correct false claims and to stand firm without hostility. Their strength would be shown through consistency, not noise. Late one evening, the elder walked the land alone. The stars were bright, the sky clear. He thought of his ancestors, of the many times they had faced choices like this. He felt their presence, steady and grounding. In the distance, lights glowed from the rancher's estate. A place of comfort, now filled with restlessness. The rancher sat awake that night, staring at papers spread across his desk. For the first time in a long while, he felt uncertain. The tools he relied on, money, influence, charm, no longer worked as they once had. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. He wondered briefly if he had crossed a line he could not step back over. On the reservation, fires burned low as families settled in for the night. The story was still unfolding, but one thing was clear. The truth had begun to surface, and once light touches something hidden for too long, it rarely retreats. What began as an insult was now revealing a larger picture. And as that picture came into focus, the balance of power began to shift, not through force, but through clarity, patience, and the quiet strength of those who refused to be diminished. The change did not come all at once. It came through small signs that added up, like stones placed one by one on a path. People outside the reservation began to speak more carefully when the rancher's name was mentioned. Meetings that once felt one-sided now included more listeners. The air around the situation felt different, as if the truth had shifted the ground beneath everyone's feet. The elders decided it was time to step forward in a clear and open way, not with anger, not with blame, but with calm strength. They agreed that silence had already done its job. It had allowed the facts to surface. Now it was time to speak, not to attack, but to stand. A gathering was planned, larger than any before. Word went out to neighboring communities, local leaders, legal observers, and advocates who had reached out quietly over the past weeks. The invitation was simple. Come listen. Come witness. No shouting. No signs, just truth spoken plainly. On the day of the gathering, the sky was wide and bright. People arrived early, some driving long distances. Folding chairs were set in rows. Water was offered freely. Elders took their places at the front, sitting side by side, steady and composed. The elder's wife sat among them, not separate, not hidden, exactly where she belonged. The rancher was invited as well. The message was clear. He could come and listen just as others would. No special seat, no special treatment. When he arrived, his presence caused a ripple through the crowd. Some faces hardened. Others looked away. He walked stiffly, his confidence thinner than before. He took a seat near the back, surrounded not by supporters but by quiet observers. The gathering began with a moment of silence, not for drama but for grounding. The elder stood slowly, his movements measured. When he spoke, his voice carried without force. "We are here because a line was crossed," he said. not only against one family but against a people. He did not repeat the words that had caused the harm. He did not need to. Everyone already knew. Instead, he spoke of respect, of shared responsibility, of the importance of seeing one another as human before anything else. He spoke of history, not as a complaint, but as a lesson. Others spoke next. A woman described how moments like this brought back memories her grandmother had shared. A young man spoke about growing up watching his elders choose patience over reaction. A legal advocate explained the importance of addressing harm through proper channels with clarity and record. Each voice added weight, not emotional weight, but truth. When it was the rancher's turn, there was no demand, only an opening. He stood, clearing his throat. He tried to speak confidently, but his words stumbled. He talked about misunderstanding, about intent, about jokes that went wrong. The crowd listened without interruption. When he finished, there was silence again. Then the elder's wife stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She spoke about what it meant to be seen as a person, not a bargaining piece. She spoke about partnership, about shared life, about dignity that cannot be measured or exchanged. Her words were simple, but they landed deeply. "I am not offended," she said calmly. "I am aware." That sentence traveled through the crowd like a quiet wave. The rancher sat down slowly. He did not look up again. After the gathering, the response was immediate but controlled. Reports were written. Statements were shared. Support poured in from places far beyond the desert. The story was no longer just about an offer. It was about accountability. Officials began to review past dealings involving the rancher, not because of pressure, but because questions now had reason. Contracts were re-examined. Agreements were reopened. Nothing dramatic happened overnight, but movement had begun. The rancher felt it everywhere. Banks asked for updated information. Partners delayed projects. A planned expansion quietly paused. He grew frustrated, then angry, then tired. He could no longer dismiss what was happening as noise. One evening he drove alone, passing land that once felt secure. Fences stood firm, but something inside him felt unsteady. He realized that power built without respect was fragile. He had never needed to face that truth before. On the reservation, the mood was steady, not triumphant. People understood that standing up did not mean everything was over. It meant the path forward would be clearer, but not easier. The elder reminded everyone that dignity was not proven by outcomes but by choices. They had chosen not to react in haste. They had chosen unity. They had chosen to let truth speak louder than force. The elder's wife returned to her routines. She cooked. She laughed with children. She tended the land. Yet people noticed something new in her step, not pride, assurance. One afternoon, a young girl asked her why she spoke at the gathering when she did not have to. She smiled gently. "Because silence is only powerful when it protects," she said, "not when it hides." As weeks passed, the story settled into public understanding. It was no longer whispered. It was discussed thoughtfully. Schools invited speakers. Community groups shared lessons. What began as an insult became an example. The rancher issued a statement eventually. It was shorter than expected, less polished. He acknowledged harm without fully naming it. It satisfied some, disappointed others, but it marked a shift. He had learned that not every situation could be managed from a position of control. Some required humility. Whether he truly understood that lesson remained to be seen. As the sun set one evening, the elder and his wife stood together again, watching shadows stretch across the land. They did not speak of victory. They spoke of tomorrow. The line that had been drawn was now clear to everyone, and once seen, it could not be ignored. What came next would not erase the past, but it would shape the future, and that, they knew, was worth standing for. The weeks that followed did not bring loud endings or sudden changes. Instead, they brought something quieter and deeper. Life continued, but it no longer felt the same. The land seemed to breathe easier, as if a long-held weight had finally been set down. On the reservation, mornings returned to their familiar rhythm. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children walked to school. Elders greeted the day with steady steps. Yet beneath the ordinary flow of life, there was a shared understanding that something important had been protected. Not land alone, not water alone, but dignity. The elder spent more time walking among the people now. He listened to laughter, to worries, to plans for the future. He noticed how conversations had changed. People spoke with more confidence, not because they expected favors, but because they trusted their own voice. The events of the past weeks had reminded them of who they were. The elder's wife remained a quiet center of this change. She never sought attention, yet her presence continued to guide others. Women came to her not with fear, but with ideas. Young people came not with anger, but with questions about leadership, patience, and courage. She answered honestly, always returning to the same truth: respect begins inside. One afternoon, a group of students visited the reservation as part of a cultural exchange. They asked about history, about traditions, and eventually about the recent events they had read about. The elder spoke calmly, explaining that standing firm did not require shouting or threats. It required knowing where one stands and refusing to move from that place. What mattered most, he said, was choosing not to become what challenged us. The students listened closely. Some took notes. Others simply watched, realizing they were witnessing something real, something not found in books. Beyond the reservation, consequences continued to unfold. The rancher's world grew smaller, though not empty. Business deals slowed. Some partnerships ended quietly. Others demanded changes he was not used to making. People no longer nodded along without question. They asked for clarity, for accountability. At first, he resisted. He blamed others. He blamed the media. He blamed misunderstanding. But resistance takes energy, and over time it wears thin. One evening he found himself alone in his office, staring at a photograph on the wall. It showed him years earlier, standing proudly beside his first successful venture. He looked younger, certain, untouched by doubt. For the first time, he wondered when certainty had turned into entitlement. He thought back to the meeting, to the silence that followed his words, to the way the elder's wife had looked at him, not with fear or anger, but with awareness. That memory stayed with him longer than he expected. Slowly, something shifted, not dramatically, not publicly, but internally. He began to understand that power without respect isolates, that control without care collapses. These thoughts did not make him a different man overnight, but they opened a door he had never considered before. Back on the reservation, a new season approached. The water flow issue was revisited, this time with outside mediation. Agreements were made more carefully. Boundaries were respected. It was not perfect, but it was progress. The tribe did not celebrate this as a win over someone else. They saw it as a restoration of balance. Balance with the land, balance with neighbors, balance within themselves. A gathering was held, smaller than the last, meant only for the community. There was food, music, and stories. Elders spoke of ancestors. Parents watched children dance. Laughter filled the air, light and unforced. The elder stood near the fire, watching the flames rise and fall. His wife joined him, handing him a cup of warm tea. They stood quietly, side by side, as they had so many times before. "We didn't choose this path," she said softly. "No," he replied, "but we chose how to walk it." As the night deepened, the stars shone brightly above them. The same stars that had watched over generations before. The same stars that would remain long after names and disputes faded. In nearby towns, the story continued to be shared, but it changed as it traveled. It became less about the rancher and more about the response. About restraint, about dignity, about a community that refused to be reduced. Teachers used it as an example. Leaders referenced it in discussions about responsibility. Families talked about it at dinner tables, not with anger but with reflection. The rancher eventually visited the reservation again, not with cameras, not with announcements. He came quietly requesting a meeting. The elders agreed, but on their terms. The meeting was brief. There were no long speeches. He spoke simply, acknowledging harm without excuses. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked for understanding. The elders listened. They did not rush to respond. When the meeting ended, nothing dramatic happened. No handshake for the cameras. No statements released. Just a mutual recognition that something had been learned. Whether the rancher would truly change was not for them to decide. What mattered was that they had not bent themselves to force it. Time moved forward as it always does. Seasons changed. Children grew taller. Elders passed on wisdom. The land endured. Years later, when the story was told again, it was not told with bitterness. It was told as a reminder. That dignity is not loud. That strength does not always look like force. That sometimes the most powerful response is simply refusing to be moved. The elder and his wife grew older together, still walking the land, still watching the sun rise and set. They knew their story would one day become memory, then history. And they were content with that, because what they had protected was not just for themselves. It was for those who would come after, for those who would face their own challenges, their own tests. And when those moments came, the land would remember, the people would remember, that some things cannot be bought, that some lines cannot be crossed. And that dignity, once claimed, belongs forever.